Hey guys, tonight we're digging into something weird, haunting and strangely familiar. The ways women in the Middle Ages hurt themselves, all in the name of beauty. The lengths they went to weren't just extreme, they were outright dangerous. And the wildest part, a lot of it was considered not just fashionable but holy. You're about to slip into a world where your appearance could be a moral battleground, and the mirror didn't just reflect your face, it judged your soul. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you watching from? Drop your city and time in the comments. Are you curled up in bed in Munich at 11 PM, listening while commuting through Philly traffic at 6 AM? I want to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a mirror, but not the kind you're thinking of. You're standing in a drafty stone chamber, maybe a lady's solar, maybe a convent dormitory. There's no glass, just a polished disc of bronze or blown metal. The surface warped like a memory. You lean in, squint, and see a vague blur of features. Yours. In the flickering light of a beeswax candle, you're trying to decide whether you look godly enough. Not pretty, exactly. Not even attractive. What you're after is spiritual beauty, and in the Middle Ages that meant looking as pure and untouchable as an ivory statue of the Virgin Mary. This wasn't just vanity, it was survival. For women, beauty wasn't some optional pursuit, it was tangled up in your morality, your class, and sometimes your safety. A face could damn you or save you. The church preached that women were born temptresses, descended from Eve, biologically wired to lead men astray. So, to be taken seriously, as a virtuous maiden, a worthy wife, or a pious widow, you had to fight your own face. Be beautiful, but not too beautiful. Show purity in every pore. Because if you were ugly, that was bad. But if you were too beautiful, that was worse. You learned pretty quickly that natural beauty was suspicious. A clear complexion. Must be vanity. Rosy cheeks. Carnal desire. White skin. Holy. Wrinkles. A punishment. It's a tightrope, and most women walk it barefoot, blindfolded, and with 1,000 eyes watching from behind tapestries and pulpits. Even your body wasn't really yours. It was seen as a vessel of temptation, something to be hidden or shaped or tamed. The church taught that a woman's appearance reflected the state of her soul, which means if your skin was too dark, your waist too thick, or your hair too unruly, people assumed your morals were out of control too. You were either a Madonna or a Magdalene, no in between. So what did the ideal woman look like? Think soft white skin, so pale it seemed untouched by the sun or sin. A high, smooth forehead, so high that women literally plucked their hairlines back an inch or more. Thin, almost non-existent eyebrows, slender hands with long fingers, hair like golden thread if you were rich, like freshly spun linen if you were poor, and eyes that never looked directly at anyone, especially not a man, because good women didn't assert themselves like that. Let's pause on that forehead thing. Imagine taking a pair of iron tweezers, heating them slightly by a fire so the grip is better, and then plucking out the front row of your scalp hair, one by one, over and over. The result? A shining bare dome that said, I am disciplined. I am controlled. I am better than temptation. Yeah, people in the Middle Ages were pulling out their own hair to look less sexy. You've probably heard of the smoky eye or the Brazilian wax. But this was medieval manscaping meets spiritual warfare. Here's the twist though. While beauty was supposedly about modesty and holiness, it was also a power move. Nobles, especially women of high status, used it to show class dominance. A milk-white face didn't just say I'm pure, it said I don't work in the sun. A tiny waist showed you had servants. Elaborate veils and silks showed you had money. Beauty was social armour, especially in a world where you couldn't own property, couldn't inherit titles, and barely had legal personhood. So you turn yourself into an icon because it's the closest thing to leverage you've got. Now, it gets weirder. In many cases, beauty practices were tied to religious rituals. You didn't just clean your face, you purified it. There were prayers for bathing, for braiding your hair, for applying salves. Some monasteries even had strict rules about when nuns could look in mirrors and for how long. To beautify yourself without permission or without prayer, that could be considered prideful, even sinful. So here you are, applying an herbal cream made from goose fat and powdered lily root, whispering a Hail Mary under your breath, hoping that by whitening your skin, you're whitening your soul too. One real historical example that's kind of heartbreaking: there were young women in Italy and France who became obsessed with a practice called anorexia mirabilis, miraculous anorexia. They believed that starving themselves made them closer to God, and incidentally, also thinner, paler, and more saint-like. One girl was so determined to never eat, she chewed rose petals and chalk to suppress her appetite. She died before she turned 20 and was later canonized, sainted for starving herself to death. It's tragic, but it shows how deeply beauty and virtue were intertwined. And here's a little fringe fact you probably didn't expect. In some circles, women believed that bathing too often made you less virtuous. Baths were for courtesans, not good Christian women. So instead, they'd powder themselves with scented ash or rub rose oil into their armpits while avoiding water for weeks. Imagine walking into a room filled with unbathed but heavily perfumed noblewomen. It probably smelled like incense and desperation. Meanwhile, scholars still debate, was this all brainwashing by a patriarchal system? Or were some women fully aware, using these beauty rituals to claim power in a system rigged against them? Some argue that even painful grooming was a form of self-expression. Others say it was straight-up survivalism. The truth? It's probably both. But what's certain is that beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't just about looking nice. It was about salvation, status, and staying alive. The first time you pluck your hairline, it's with fingers that tremble more from fear than pain. You're not even using tweezers, just a twisted loop of silk thread, rubbed with ashes and wound tight between your knuckles. The goal? Total eradication of every hair between your eyebrows and the crown of your head. The pain isn't sharp. It's a dull sting that builds, like your scalp is being peeled. Every tug leaves a raw spot, a little line of red, and you keep going because that's what good women do. A high forehead is the mark of nobility, of chastity, of elegance, and you don't want to look like a peasant, do you? By the time you're done, your hairline has receded almost an inch. Your brow is smooth, blank, like a scroll waiting for judgment. You're hideous, but in the right way, and that's the twisted beauty of it. In the Middle Ages, looking beautiful wasn't about looking like yourself. It was about looking like not yourself, like something cleaner, colder, more divine. So the eyebrows go next, not trimmed, not shaped, ripped out entirely, because facial hair is masculine, and God forbid a woman look too strong. This trend starts among the wealthy, as most do. Rich noblewomen and courtly ladies lead the charge, their blank brows and tall foreheads towering like miniature battlements over hollow eyes. You see them in illuminated manuscripts, serene, pious, and distinctly strange. They look like aliens in wimples, but poor women copy it too when they can, because beauty trickles down, even when it hurts. You overhear a merchant's wife saying she rubs quicklime and vinegar along her forehead to make the hair fall out on its own. It burns like fire and leaves scabs, but she swears it's worth it. Another girl, younger than you, says she uses cat urine, yes, really, mixed with crushed oak galls to weaken the follicles. It stinks, but she says it makes her skin glow afterward. None of it is safe. Some of it is borderline chemical warfare. But that's what desperation looks like when the mirror judges you with a holy standard. And just when you think the weirdness has peaked, you find out about fashions named after the forehead. There's literally a style called the Queen's Front, where women shave their temples and upper foreheads to mimic the royal look. This isn't just trend chasing, it's survival. Because the higher your forehead, the closer you are to royalty in the eyes of the world. And if you're seen as noble, you're less likely to be accused of being a witch, or a harlot, or worse. Of course, not everyone's on board. In rural villages there are women who still plait their hair tight to their brows and stare judgmentally at your egg-like forehead. Unnatural, they mutter. Unholy. But that only makes you lean in harder, because you want to be admired. You want to be safe, and if that means obliterating your own face one follicle at a time, so be it. Here's a historical fact that might make you shiver a bit. Plucked foreheads weren't just about status. They were believed to enhance your spiritual beauty. Monks and physicians alike wrote that a clear, empty forehead showed clarity of mind and moral discipline. Some texts even claim that high foreheads were more receptive to divine visions. So, by yanking out those hairs, you weren't just conforming to fashion, you were making room for God. But let's get quirky for a second. Did you know that some women kept little pouches of mouse fur to stick onto their foreheads? Sounds backward, right? You just plucked everything out and now you're gluing dead animal parts to your face. But these weren't to replace the eyebrows. They were fake brows, yes, but not in the modern sense. They were sometimes worn slightly higher on the face as a kind of accessory, or to frame the eyes dramatically. Think of them as medieval drag lashes, only grosser. And of course, this whole beauty standard wasn't unchallenged. Scholars still debate whether this trend was driven by internalized oppression or by women manipulating power in subtle ways. Some point to female poets and writers, yes, they existed, who mocked the practice in coded language. Others argue that the church subtly encouraged it because it made women look less sexually threatening. A woman with no brows and a forehead like a parchment scroll, not exactly an aphrodisiac, unless you were into the holy relic aesthetic. The funny thing is, men noticed, and not always in a good way. There are records of husbands and bishops complaining that their wives were disfiguring themselves. One preacher in Paris gave an entire sermon about how women who removed their eyebrows were shaving away their souls. Chill, dude. But also, kind of understandable, because when everyone's plucking themselves into near baldness, it gets weird fast. Still, the pressure is real, and it doesn't stop with hair. That smooth forehead is meant to go with a blank, passive expression. Smiling too much? Flirting? Looking angry? Sinful? Your whole face becomes a mask, one that you have to construct every morning with painful rituals and powders that smell like a cross between burned herbs and boiled soap. You learn to sit still for hours while your maid smooths rosewater over your skin and traces crushed elderberries on your lips, only to wipe them off when the priest is near, and you start to notice something. The more effort you put into erasing yourself, plucking, scraping, smoothing, the more people seem to approve. The compliments are soft, passive-aggressive. You look serene today. You remind me of St. Agnes. Your forehead looks so disciplined. It's not really praise, it's code for good girl. You've controlled your body. You've made yourself small. By the end of the day, your head aches from the strain and you wonder if anyone actually finds this beautiful, or if you've all just agreed to pretend. But tomorrow you'll do it again, because not doing it means something worse. It means questions, suspicion, maybe even accusations, and in this world that can be deadly. You wake before the sun, groggy from a restless night, and pad across the icy stone floor. There's no glass window to tell you if the sky's gone grey or gold, but you know the morning routine by heart. Before prayer, before bread, before conversation, you sit before your polished brass mirror and start on your skin. It isn't just any skin, it's your most visible virtue. You need it pale, not just light, ethereal. The kind of pale that makes you look untouched, unspoiled, and maybe already halfway to heaven. This is the ideal. Skin like cream, like alabaster, like the pages of a freshly written psalm. But unless you're born with that rare noble glow, and spoiler, you're not, you'll have to make it happen the hard way. So today, you're going with a popular concoction: vinegar, white lead powder, and a touch of egg white for stiffness. The paste smells sour and metallic, but that's the point. The vinegar stings your pores, and the lead, that's where the magic happens. It coats your face in a ghostly white sheen that cracks if you smile too wide. You smooth it carefully around your nose, over your cheeks, around the edges of your blank plucked brow. Then you wait. Let it dry. Let it set. There's a reason women used lead, and it wasn't just ignorance. Lead worked. It covered blemishes, lightened freckles, hid scars from smallpox and harsh sun. In a time with no real dermatology and plenty of skin diseases, lead paint made you look flawless. But it came at a cost. Over time, it poisoned your blood, made your teeth fall out, gave you headaches, dizziness, and a ghost-like pallor that slowly became more corpse than angel. The cruel irony? The sicker it made you, the closer it brought you to the ideal. Historians now know many medieval women suffered from chronic lead poisoning. Some literally died from their beauty routine. They didn't call it that, of course. They called it devotion. But every time you dipped your fingers into that shimmering white pot, You are making a quiet little gamble with your life. And yet, you're not alone. Every noble court in Europe had its own version of this deadly routine. In England, women used ceruse, basically a paste of white lead and vinegar, to gostify their faces. In Venice, a trend called biacca took off, where upper-class women layered lead creams with mercury-based highlighters to add glow. In France, they sometimes mixed crushed pearls into the paste for extra shimmer. Sounds luxurious, right? Except pearls aren't exactly digestible, or safe to inhale. But hey, your cheeks sparkle in candlelight. One woman reportedly used powdered emeralds in her facial mask. Emeralds, crushed into dust and rubbed into her skin, which, yes, added a faint greenish glow, but also likely gave her a rash that never quite healed. The beauty industry in the Middle Ages, less Sephora, more small-scale chemical warfare. But what made it even more twisted was how the church reacted to it. You might think religious leaders would have condemned this kind of vanity, and you'd be partly right, but only partly. Preachers did rant about pride and cosmetics. There were sermons about how painted women led men to sin, how covering your natural form was lying to God, and how women who wore too much makeup were witches in disguise. But, and it's a big but, those same leaders often made exceptions for noble women, especially if they were married to powerful men or patrons of the church. In other words, if you had enough money or social power, poisoning your face was technically fine, as long as you did it in moderation. Hypocrisy? Absolutely. But welcome to the Middle Ages. Now let's get into the science. You know how lead works. It absorbs into the bloodstream over time, accumulating in soft tissue, attacking the nervous system. Symptoms start subtly. Fatigue, insomnia, abdominal pain, but eventually become impossible to ignore. Tremors, blindness, madness. You've heard whispers about women in the court of Burgundy who trembled constantly, their skin perfect but their minds fraying. Or the noble in Castile who lost her voice after years of mercury exposure. The price of beauty was sometimes silence, and yet people kept doing it. Because a pale face meant power, it meant protection. In a world of plague and famine, having perfect skin suggested you were untouched by hardship. It told everyone you didn't labour, didn't sweat, didn't age, that your blood was clean, your soul unstained, your status untouchable. If people noticed the trembling hands or the faint grey shadows under your eyes, they rarely said anything. Because no one wanted to admit that looking beautiful might be killing you. Here's the fringe fact for tonight. Some women, especially those who couldn't afford lead paste, turned to something even more grotesque, bloodletting. Yes, to get that perfectly pale look, they drained small amounts of blood from their arms or ankles in the morning, just enough to look wan and ethereal by the afternoon. Doctors approved, believe it or not. They called it balancing the humours. Beauty was just a bonus. And even more tragically, this wasn't always just about beauty. For many women, this was about marriage. The medieval world didn't offer many ways out. If you weren't rich enough to buy land or lucky enough to be born into a nunnery, your only real path was to marry someone who could keep you safe. And beauty was currency. The paler your skin, the more pure you looked. The more pure you looked, the better your chances. So yes, you'd smear poison across your face every day, because your future depended on it. There are scholars who still argue about this. Were these women victims of a cruel, patriarchal system? Of course. But were they also strategic? Absolutely. Many knew the risks. Some even wrote about them. But in a world that measured a woman's worth by her face, what choice did they have? What would you have done? The mask has dried now, tight across your skin like a second face. You don't smile. You don't blink too quickly. You float through your day like a marble statue glowing faintly under your veil. Everyone sees you and nods with silent approval. You are, for now, beautiful. And beneath it all, your body quietly suffers. You don't even flinch anymore when you open the little tin and smell the tang of metal and decay. That's just what beauty smells like now. You dip your fingers into the white paste, cold and smooth like clay left in a riverbed, and start dabbing it onto your cheeks. It spreads easily, like softened butter, but what you're spreading is white lead, a known killer, even back then, if people had bothered to listen. But they don't, because the truth doesn't matter as much as the illusion. And the illusion is everything. This particular recipe is one of the more popular ones. Lead carbonate mixed with vinegar and sometimes honey, though you skip the honey because it makes the paste sticky. It goes on thick, ghostly, coating your skin with a brightness that the candlelight dances off of. From a distance you look flawless, angelic even. Up close, not so much. The cracks are starting to show around your mouth, under your eyes, in the curve of your jaw. You blend more carefully there, try not to smile too much. Smiling makes it worse. You've been warned by your maidservant. She's seen the signs in others. Teeth gone black, she says softly one night as she brushes your hair. Skin rotting off like tree bark. But she still helps you apply it. Everyone does. Because no one wants to be the one woman who walks into a hall barefaced, with her freckles showing and her cheeks ruddy like a kitchen girl. Even she sometimes swipes a bit of your powder when she thinks you're not looking. Today you decide to try something extra. You pull out a tiny bottle of aqua mercurialis, basically mercury dissolved in water, used as a sort of early skin toner. It stings as soon as it hits your cheeks. Not a polite sting either. It burns, like citrus juice in a paper cut, only deeper. It tightens your skin instantly, giving you that unnatural glassy sheen that's all the rage in the Burgundian courts. You look in the mirror and see a porcelain mask staring back. It's beautiful, terrifyingly so. Back then, no one would have called it toxic. They called it luxurious. This was expensive stuff after all. Apothecaries sold it in tiny flasks wrapped in cloth, with Latin labels and gold stoppers. The wealthier you were, the more dangerous your cosmetics tended to be. Poor women used crushed chalk and clay, maybe a bit of rice flour if they were lucky. But you've got access to poisons disguised as luxury. You're practically glowing with it. And while you're rubbing death into your pores, you start thinking about why pale skin became the thing in the first place. It wasn't just aesthetics, it was economics. In the Middle Ages, everyone knew what dark skin meant. Not racially, but socially. It meant labour, it meant fields, it meant hours under the sun harvesting wheat or hanging laundry. Pale skin, on the other hand, meant shade, leisure, an indoor life protected by stone walls and linen drapes. So you're not just lightening your face, you're painting a class identity onto it. You're saying, I don't toil, I don't sweat, I exist for beauty and prayer. But this gets more twisted when you look at the church's role in all of it. Priests and monks were constantly warning women about vanity, sermons full of fire and brimstone about Jezebel and painted faces and moral rot. But they also praised virgin saints for their luminous complexions, their radiant beauty. Saints weren't allowed to be plain, they had to be physically perfect, chaste and glowing, untouched by sun or sin. So which was it? Were you supposed to be humble and drab or glowing and holy? This contradiction wasn't lost on medieval women. They walked the line with precision. Paint your face too obviously and you were vain, maybe even a temptress. But look too plain and you risk being seen as unkempt, unfeminine or worse, irrelevant. So you learned to be subtle, a soft flush to the cheeks, a pale base that didn't crack too obviously, lips stained just barely enough to seem naturally red. The ultimate goal was to look like you hadn't tried at all, just woke up this way, miraculously. And speaking of lips, you decide to add a little colour today. Nothing too bold, just a touch of crushed cochineal beetle, yes, an actual insect, mixed with rose oil and rubbed gently onto your lower lip. It's expensive, almost scandalously so, but the results are worth it. Your lips look blood-kissed, like you've just come from confession or maybe a particularly emotional hymn. That's the sweet spot. Holy, but slightly breathless. Innocent, but almost temptingly so. But now, here's a strange and ugly little twist. During certain times, especially the 14th century, wearing visible makeup could literally get you labelled a heretic, or worse, a witch. There were actual church edicts against adulterating the face with powders, rouges and salves. They claimed it was a deception, an affront to God's natural design. So if you were caught with a little too much red on your cheeks, people didn't just gossip. They questioned your soul. One record from 1379 tells of a woman in Rouen accused of using devilish ointments to seduce a priest. Her crime? Wearing lip stain and eyeliner during Easter Mass. She was flogged, publicly. Another woman, a merchant's widow, was rumoured to have used mercury creams to appear youthful, and eventually drove her suitors mad. She was accused of bewitchment, not because of spells or potions, but because her skin was too smooth for her age. This whole beauty as sorcery concept got wrapped up in folklore too. People believed certain cosmetics had magical properties. Love potions and face creams were sometimes the same thing. There were whispered recipes that included bat's blood, powdered toadstone, or, even, no joke, a paste made from menstrual blood and thyme, supposedly able to capture a man's attention with a single glance. Whether anyone actually used them is up for debate, but the fear was real. A woman who looked too good might not just be suspicious, she might be supernatural. Which brings us to one of the enduring debates among historians. Were these beauty rituals a form of resistance or oppression? Did women genuinely believe in them? Were they just trying to survive? Or did some know exactly what they were doing, using appearance as a weapon in a world where they had no swords? It's murky. The records are fragmented. But in the gaps, you can imagine the smirking self-awareness of a woman smoothing poison across her cheek, knowing full well it was both a risk and a statement. You finish your routine and glance into the warped mirror again. You look perfect. Lifeless. Yes. A little terrifying, maybe, but perfect. No blemishes, no colour except where you placed it. Your face is a blank canvas with just enough artistry to look divine. You pull your veil forward and prepare to face the world. You'll keep still, speak softly, smile rarely. And if anyone notices your pale perfection, you'll nod modestly and say it's just good blood. Your fingers tremble slightly as you lift the tiny pot of rouge. It's not fear, not exactly. It's more like anticipation, sharpened by a whisper of danger. This little jar contains crushed madder root mixed with pig's fat. Nothing exotic, nothing too forbidden, but too much of it, or wearing it at the wrong moment, and suddenly you're not a lady trying to look divine. You're a harlot, or worse, a heretic. That's the medieval gamble of red. 1 dab is charming, 2 is damnation. Still, you dab it on. A little on the cheeks. Just enough to suggest that flush of life, like you've just stepped out of a cold chapel or a confessional booth where the priest said something stirring. Anything more, though, and you risk crossing a line. Because red doesn't just mean healthy, it means heated. It hints at lust, at the warmth of blood, at appetites you're not supposed to admit to having. And in the moral gymnastics of medieval Europe, wearing red was like waving a tiny flag that said, I might be thinking about sin. Not surprisingly, men had a lot of opinions about rouge. Theologians, philosophers, and amateur moralists all warned against the painted woman. They said red cheeks stirred impure thoughts, that they mimicked the effects of wine or arousal. In some sermons, red powder was described as the devil's blush, a colour worn by Eve just before the fall. The logic was bonkers, but the pressure was real. You were supposed to glow, but not too brightly. To blush, but only if the emotion was genuine and witnessed at the exact right moment. So the trick? You learn to fake it perfectly. You practice the application like a ritual. Smear, blend, tap, breathe. A soft circle high on the cheekbone, just where the skin might naturally warm if you were, say, struck by divine inspiration. And that's the thing. Sometimes you told yourself it was divine inspiration. That God would rather see you presentable. That a bit of red helped highlight the purity of the rest of you. White skin, red cheeks, like the Holy Virgin herself, as painted in hundreds of stained glass windows. The line between piety and prettiness was blurred, and blurred on purpose. Of course, you're not alone in this balancing act. Beauty manuals from the time, yes, they existed, often passed hand to hand or scribbled in the margins of recipe books, gave careful instructions for applying rouge without offending, mix with white for subtlety, dilute with oil to give the colour a sheen of sweat. One anonymous guide suggests rubbing the skin lightly with a nettle first to create a natural flush. Bold move, painful too. Here's where it gets even weirder. There was a real, documented belief that red cheeks were a mark of internal purity. According to one French monk, a virtuous woman had blood like light wine, delicate and well balanced, not heavy or crude. And you could supposedly see that refinement in the way her skin blushed. Think about that. A whole theory of morality based on the shade of your cheek. But not all women could play the rouge game. Nuns, for example, were forbidden from wearing makeup, even the most subtle kinds, at least officially. but whispered rumours told of abbesses who kept tiny rouge pots hidden in their sleeves, touching up their faces before major feast days. They'd murmur prayers while doing it, hoping God was too busy dealing with plagues and inquisitions to care about a bit of pig fat and dye. One abbess in Austria even kept a stash of dried strawberries, which she rubbed across her lips before taking communion. No one called her out. She was too powerful. And let's be honest, she probably looked fabulous. Still, the church cracked down harder on certain women than others. Prostitutes were often forced to wear exaggerated makeup, sometimes even marked with specific symbols or colours to visually separate them from virtuous women. In some cities, a red sash was required, or red sleeves, or overly bright cheeks that broadcasted their status from a distance. Beauty in this context wasn't about elevation, it was a scarlet branding. You didn't wear rouge because you wanted to look holy. You wore it because the state wanted people to know you were profane. That's the historical fact of the night. Medieval brothels often operated under local law and came with strict appearance rules for women. The makeup wasn't just allowed, it was mandated. Red lips, bright cheeks, garish eyes. All of it was part of the uniform. It made the distinction clear, which women were for worship and which were for sale. But here's the fringe fact, less official, more whispered. Some noble women envied the look. There were tales of court ladies sneaking out to the red districts, not for sin, but for style tips. A certain Venetian countess was said to keep a courtesan on retainer just to consult her on makeup. She once hosted a dinner where all the women wore heavy rouge, crimson silk and deep red veils. The bishop who attended stormed out in protest. Everyone else clapped. You, meanwhile, take a moment to inspect your work. You tilt your face toward the light, watching how the red lifts your cheeks. Not too much, not too little. The perfect glow of holiness. And health. You know it won't last. Sweat, dust, time. All of it will wear down your illusion. But for now, you've nailed it. And this brings up one of the oldest debates among modern scholars. Were women in the Middle Ages tricked into hurting themselves for beauty, or were they clever enough to know it and still choose it? Some say the system left them no choice, that it was beauty or invisibility, and both came with consequences. Others argue that wearing rouge and lead paint wasn't just conformity, it was rebellion in disguise, a way of saying, no, I'm here, I matter, I control how I'm seen. Maybe both are true, maybe it depends on the day. Today you feel like a little bit of both, obedient and dangerous. You sweep the last of the red across your cheeks and blend it with the side of your finger. A soft flush blooms. You say a prayer under your breath, not for forgiveness, but for effect, and then you rise. The veil goes on. The illusion is complete. You are a vision, pale as parchment, red as martyrdom, someone holy, someone delicate, someone to be watched, and watched carefully. You cinch the cord a little tighter, then a little tighter still until your breath comes in careful practice sips. Not gasps, never gasps. Gasping's for girls who didn't prepare properly, who can't hold their ribs in place like a lady should. You, on the other hand, are mastering the art of containment. It's not a corset yet, that'll come later, but you're wearing what's called a girdle, a long band of linen or wool wrapped around your midsection and tied so tightly it feels like your own spine is working against you. You've been taught to wear it since your first bleed, a sign you're ready to be shaped, spiritually, physically, socially. At first it hurts like someone trying to fold you. You wonder if this is what prayer is supposed to feel like, not peace, not quiet, but compression. Your body becoming smaller and stiffer, the way parchment gets when it dries under weight. Because in this world, a small waist isn't just attractive, it's moral. Discipline you can see from across a hall. There's something about the way people look at you when you're bound. You know what they're thinking. She's proper, she's contained, she's pure, no excess, no curves spilling where they shouldn't. If your chest moves too freely, they say you're uncontrolled. If your hips sway too easily, they whisper about loose morals. So you squeeze, you lace, you tug until your stomach is flat and your ribs press forward, sharp as a prayer bench. This isn't vanity, this is architecture. A female form shaped like the top of a chalice. Slim, elegant, spiritual. Of course, no one says the word sexy. That would ruin it. But the contradiction's baked into the whole thing. The alluring, but pretend you're not. Be graceful, but suffer quietly, and never, ever admit that it's uncomfortable. That would break the spell. So you practice holding your breath. Not dramatically, just enough to keep from fainting mid-mass. Some girls do. You've seen them. One collapsed last summer during the bishop's sermon, her girdle so tight they had to cut it with a knife. Her mother scolded her while she lay on the stone floor, barely breathing. "Don't humiliate yourself," she hissed. "Beauty is pain." And then the girl stood up and apologized to the bishop. You know what happens to women who don't bind themselves. They're ridiculed for letting themselves go, even at 20. A rounded belly means laziness. Or worse, pregnancy out of wedlock. Even married women are expected to lace up. After all, a neat silhouette reflects a neat household. Your figure isn't just yours, it's a family brand. Your mother started binding you before your breasts fully came in. She said you'd thank her. You haven't. But you never told her that. Of course, you're not wearing whalebone or steel, those come centuries later, but the effect is the same. Linen, leather, raw hide. Some women even wet their girdles before putting them on, so they shrink tighter as they dry. You did that once. Nearly passed out before breakfast. Never again. Here's a historical fact that might make your lungs ache in sympathy. The average noblewoman's waist in some fashion illustrations is shown exaggeratedly narrow, sometimes less than half the width of her hips. We can't be sure how realistic that was, but garments survive that suggest waist sizes as small as 18 inches. That's smaller than the average modern-day head. And remember, there were no zippers, no elastic, just knots and straps and sheer willpower. Now for the fringe detail, some women believed their girdles had magical properties. No joke. Girdles were often embroidered with charms, saints' names, or even tiny prayers. One surviving example from 14th century England had a Latin inscription stitched into the lining that translates to, "May the Lord encircle me with strength and grace." There were even holy girdles passed between mothers and daughters, thought to protect against miscarriage or sin. Imagine tying a prayer around your waist every morning and hoping it kept your soul, and figure, in check. But again, this wasn't just a personal choice, it was social surveillance. People could tell if you weren't girdled, your silhouette betrayed you, your movement gave you away. Loose clothing, an open invitation, a relaxed posture, proof of laziness. So the pressure was constant and not always metaphorical. Some women even wore underbelts made of iron. Not often, not commonly, but enough that they show up in records. The Middle Ages had no chill. You try to imagine what it would be like to walk freely, to let your body swell and contract like it wants to eat a meal without counting how many bites it will take before your laces feel too tight. But imagining is dangerous. It makes you question things. And that's not how this works. You don't rebel, you conform better. The better you conform, the safer you are. There are scholars who argue about what this really meant. Was it oppression, self-discipline, a performance of social power? Some even say girdling was a kind of proto-feminist ritual, women controlling their own bodies, their own images. Others say it was a cage. Most agree it was both. The truth is, no one asked the women. Their voices don't survive, but their garments do. Stiff, yellowed linen with faint sweat stains along the seams, silent, suffocating artifacts. Still, you can't help but feel a sliver of pride when your maid finishes tying off the last knot. You walk to the window, upright, gliding. Your back is straight, your shoulders narrow. Your waist? So tiny it disappears between your hips like a whisper. You look like the saints in the tapestry. And when your mother sees you, she nods in approval. That nod is all the reward you get. That, and the knowledge that for today at least you are presentable, you're acceptable, you're small enough. You go down to breakfast but you don't eat. There's a slice of dark bread and a bit of pear but you only pick at them. Not because you're not hungry, but because you can't bear the pain of pressing your full stomach against the unyielding linen walls cinched around your ribs. Hunger will pass, but the shame of being seen bulging out of your girdle, that sticks. The sun climbs higher as you take your seat in the chapel. You bow your head, hands folded, girdle biting into your waist with every breath. You're a sculpture in cloth. Nothing soft, nothing wild, nothing uncontrolled, just breathless grace. You haven't eaten in 2 days, and the hunger pangs have softened into a quiet hum, like the low drone of a chapel organ somewhere behind your ribs. It's not that food isn't available. There was porridge this morning. and someone brought in a basket of soft apples from the orchard. But you've chosen to fast. Again. Not just because it's Lent, not because of any vow you made to the local priest, and certainly not for your health. You're doing it because you want to be good. And good, for girls like you, sometimes means being empty. The other women notice, of course. You're sitting beside them at supper, sipping only water, refusing bread, keeping your eyes low like scripture taught. A few whisper that you must be especially devout. Others glance at you sideways, wondering if you're ill. But deep down, they all know. They've either done it, are doing it, or feel guilty that they haven't. It's not even that rare anymore. Across abbeys, convents, and noble courts, there's a rising trend of girls who refuse food. Not for beauty exactly, but for God. Or at least that's what they say. They call it anorexia mirabilis, though that term won't exist for centuries. The miraculous starvation of young women seeking sainthood through suffering. You've read about the saints who started it. Saint Catherine of Siena, who supposedly lived on nothing but Eucharist wafers for months and refused to eat even under papal orders. Her fast was called holy. Her sunken cheeks, a mark of divine favour. When she died at 33, people said her body was proof. She'd transcended earthly needs. A walking miracle, except she didn't walk much near the end. She mostly lay still and wasted away. And now, her legacy lives on. In you. The thing is, you weren't trying to copy her. Not exactly. It started small. A missed meal here. Skipping meat on Fridays, then Wednesdays, then most days. Fasting during Lent, and then deciding Lent wasn't long enough. You told yourself it was discipline, a spiritual exercise. But soon, you noticed other changes. Your face grew paler, your jaw sharper, your body lighter in your gowns. The compliments came quickly, so ethereal, so serene, like a statue of St. Cecilia. And suddenly hunger didn't hurt as much. It felt holy. But that holiness has a dark undercurrent. You wake with headaches. You faint at Mass. Your maid says she can count your ribs now, and not just when you're changing. You hide your bruises with extra linen and you're shaking hands with prayer. Still, no one stops you. Because in this world, suffering is sacred, especially for women. The less you need, the more divine you seem. And if that comes with a little visible fragility, all the better. Fragility is beautiful. Fragility is safe. There's a girl in your abbey who takes it further. She's only 15, but she's been fasting so strictly her breath smells like vinegar. She prays on her knees for hours, then collapses during Vespers and has to be carried out like a martyr. Everyone is in awe. The older nuns whisper that she's touched by God. But you wonder, quietly, if it's really God, or if it's the same quiet, echoing fear you feel at the bottom of your stomach when someone offers you cheese. And yet the pressure isn't always external. It builds from inside. You start to think about your body as a thing to be tamed, a beast to be caged. When you eat, you feel ashamed, not gluttonous, not indulgent, unworthy, as though the act of swallowing betrays your higher purpose. You're supposed to be above flesh. Flesh is temptation, flesh is failure. So you practice stillness, you drink broth and call it indulgence. You chew rose petals and imagine sainthood. Here's a historical fact that adds weight to this quiet epidemic. In the 13th and 14th centuries, dozens of religious women, many not formally canonized, were recorded as practicing extreme fasting to the point of collapse or death. Chroniclers at the time didn't call it illness, they called it sanctity. These women were admired, their starvation rituals written down with awe. Not once was it suggested they might have needed medical help. Instead, they were seen as divine examples, proof that holiness could conquer hunger. And here's your quirky fringe fact. Some of these fasting women were also believed to possess inedia, the miraculous ability to live without food entirely. Church officials debated whether it was a true miracle or a trick of the devil, but either way, no one asked the girls what it felt like, whether they felt blessed or broken, whether their bodies ached in the night, whether they cried when no one was looking. They were symbols, not people. You're not a symbol, though. You still feel every hunger pang. You still dream of figs and honey. You still flinch when someone bites into bread near you, the crunch ringing like a church bell in your ears. But you stay strong, you tell yourself. Strong by being weak, hollowed out, closer to God. But it's not just about God, is it? Part of you craves that power, the way people look at you now, the careful concern, the quiet reverence, like you're already halfway to sainthood, your body slipping between this world and the next. You may not have wealth, or land, or a voice in public life, but you do have this control, this visibility. They can't ignore a girl who doesn't eat. Modern scholars are torn on what to make of this. Was it proto-feminism? A rebellion against arranged marriages and social expectations? A desperate cry for control in a life of restrictions? Or was it genuine religious fervour, twisted and praised by a system that demanded women erase themselves to be admired? The truth, like always, is complicated, but your body doesn't care about nuance. It just grows weaker, and you just grow more praised. Tonight, you kneel in your cell, hands folded, vision swimming. You haven't eaten since yesterday's sunrise. Your stomach whines, then quiets. You touch your cheek and feel bone. There's a strange pride in that. A peace, almost. You whisper the Lord's Prayer, lips dry and trembling. Give us this day our daily bread. But you don't mean it literally. You can't quite tell where the scent is coming from. Rose water, maybe, or dried lavender, or some strange blend of musk and honey that clings to the air long after a woman has passed. The hall is cold stone, but the smell floats, persistent and human, like warmth, trying to make itself known. That's the thing with perfume in your world. It isn't just about smelling good. It's about covering up everything that's too real: sweat, illness, fear, poverty. You don't just wear perfume to attract, you wear it to survive. Bathing isn't a daily ritual, or even a weekly one. In fact, it's often discouraged. Hot water, they say, opens the pores to sin. Soap is rough and unnatural, and some even whisper that bathing too frequently invites illness, or worse, stirs the body's unholy desires. So what do? You coat yourself in layers of scent. The rich can afford oils: ambergris, rose, jasmine, sandalwood. The rest of you make do with dried herbs, vinegars, and animal fats steeped with whatever flowers you can find. You boil petals like they're spells. You store them in corked glass vials hidden in the folds of your gown. Today you choose clove water with a hint of sage. It stings when you dab it on your neck. You cough a little, but then the sharpness settles and you feel cleaner somehow. Not just physically, but morally. That's the twisted logic of the Middle Ages. To mask your body is to master it. To smell of flowers is to suggest your soul blooms with the same restraint. There's a fine line, though. Smell too sweet, too bold, and people start asking questions. That's the strange thing about perfume back then. It's double-edged. Used modestly, it signals refinement, health, maybe even piety. But used too much, and people start to suspect something darker. You're trying to cover something up, they think. A sin, a disease, a rotting soul. There's a word they whisper: mulia suspecta, a woman under suspicion. Too clean, too painted, too perfumed. She must be hiding something. The widow who doesn't smell of morning. The girl who smells of jasmine in the dead of winter. The servant who always smells nicer than her station allows. It's not just envy, it's fear. Because in a world teeming with death and decay, someone who smells too perfect must be unnatural. Let's talk about plague. Because yes, the Black Death changes everything. When the pestilence rolls in, through rats, through ships, through God's supposed wrath, everyone starts smelling worse and worrying more. People believe disease travels through miasma, corrupted air, invisible clouds of death that drift into your lungs and poison your blood. So women douse themselves in perfume, thinking it'll act as a barrier, a shield against the stink of corpses and, by extension, the sickness itself. That's your historical fact. Perfume wasn't just cosmetic, it was medicine. People wore pomanders, small metal balls filled with herbs and spices, around their necks or at their belts. Some slept with them. Some held them to their noses while walking past others in the street. For women, especially, scent became armour. They weren't just covering their own natural odour, they were trying to keep death out of their lungs. But here's where it gets eerie. Some believed certain scents attracted demons. No, seriously, there were actual treatises on this. Lists of corrupted smells that supposedly opened the body to temptation. Musk, patchouli, civet. Scents considered too earthy, too animal. Women who wore them were accused of inciting lust in men and inviting spiritual contamination. Imagine applying perfume and being told you were summoning a demon. Talk about pressure. And still, despite the suspicion and the risk, perfume thrived. Especially among women who had few other tools of power. You begin to understand that scent is its own language, a quiet rebellion. You may not own property, you may not speak in council, but you can choose how you smell. A whiff of violet when you pass a rival, a trace of cinnamon before an arranged meeting. These choices matter. They're tiny declarations in a world that demands your silence. In some convents, the perfume ban was strict. Nuns were prohibited from using any scent, even herbal water. It was seen as vanity. But in practice, many quietly ignored the rule. There are records, little notes in ledger margins, of perfumed oils delivered to abbeys under the label medicinal. One abbess in Germany was known for her personal blend of thyme and myrrh. She claimed it soothed her migraines. Others said it made her smell like a saint in a storm. Here's your fringe fact for the night. Some women even scented their books. No kidding. Pages were rubbed with dried rose petals or soaked briefly in lavender water. The belief was that holy reading deserved holy fragrance, that every prayer, every psalm should rise on a sweet-smelling cloud. So when you kneel in bed with your prayer book open, and the scent hits your nose, you're not just reading, you're participating, with your body, with your senses. But this all comes at a cost. Sometimes, literally. Good perfume is expensive, oils must be imported, ingredients hard to find. So, a black market blooms. Apothecaries start peddling cheaper mixes, full of rancid fats, questionable powders, and occasionally toxic additives. A bad batch of perfume can leave rashes, respiratory trouble, or worse. But most women don't ask too many questions. If it smells right and masks the rot, it's worth it. You step into the hall now, your clove sage scent soft but present. Heads turn, just slightly. No one comments directly. They rarely do. But you know what the glances mean. Approval, curiosity, maybe envy. The girl beside you smells like boiled cabbage and sweat. She shifts away, pretending not to notice. You can't help but feel a flicker of pride. You've managed to smell beautiful in a world of death. You've turned decay into allure, but you also know the stakes. Too sweet, too often, and someone might say something, might call you unnatural, might accuse you of witchcraft or seduction or worse, deceit. Because if you can control how you smell, what else are you controlling? So you keep your perfume tucked in the folds of your dress, hidden but always near. You reapply only when alone. You never share your recipe. It's not just a routine, it's your protection, your power. The rouge is dry, the perfume has settled, and your girdle's still biting into your ribs. But now it's time for the final touch. A little more red, just where it counts. You sit at the edge of your narrow bed, a sliver of morning light slipping through the shuttered window, and carefully unwrap a silk pouch. Inside is your precious blend of crushed sandalwood, a hint of madder root, and something your maid claims is powdered coral. You're not sure if she's right, but it smells faintly like blood and earth. Perfect. You lift your chin slightly and dab it onto your cheeks, just enough. Then a bit on your lips, soft and center-focused, as though your mouth has been kissed by grace and not your own fingers. This is where it gets tricky. Because unlike pale skin or even perfume, the colour red is dangerous. More than dangerous, it's loaded. A red cheek could mean fertility, vitality, youth. But it could also mean temptation, sin, the devil's influence. One drop too much and suddenly you're not a lady, you're a warning. In medieval Europe, red was both holy and damned. Cardinals wore it, so did prostitutes. Saints were painted with rosy cheeks, so were witches about to be burned. It's not that people didn't like the look, they did. But they feared what it might awaken in themselves. Red was seductive. Red suggested warmth, blood, flesh. Red was the colour of what was supposed to stay hidden. So when you paint your face, you're not just decorating, it's performance art. You're walking the line between modest and inviting, between alive and corrupt. It's a dance, and one wrong step could send you tumbling into scandal. Here's the truly maddening part. You're expected to look like you're naturally glowing with health, but without ever appearing as if you're trying to. A young bride with red cheeks? Lovely, A widow with red cheeks? Suspicious. A girl wearing red in church? Borderline blasphemous. Unless, of course, you're mourning, in which case a flush could be interpreted as proof of emotional turmoil. Unless someone decides it looks too artificial, then you're lying to God. That's the trap. You're supposed to pretend your face does this all on its own, that your cheeks bloom just so, that your lips are naturally that red, even in midwinter. You're playing a game, and the rules change constantly. You've heard the rumours. A merchant's daughter in a Rouen court putting beetroot paste on her face was accused of immodesty and forced to wear a burlap veil for a month. Another woman, an unmarried woman of course, was called before the local bishop and interrogated for improper colouring. She'd worn rouge to a festival. Her defence? I was pale from illness. They didn't believe her. She was fined and shamed and sat through a sermon on vanity with the entire congregation watching. And yet here you are brushing the same red onto your lips. Because what's the alternative? Go pale and raw and unseen? Be passed over by a potential husband? Let others think you've grown ill, or worse, indifferent? Beauty is a risk, yes, but so is being invisible. There's a strange, sweet irony here. Medieval beauty culture didn't want you to be beautiful. It wanted you to suggest beauty. You weren't supposed to shine. You were supposed to flicker. A suggestion of colour, a whisper of glow. Just enough to hint at vitality while maintaining the illusion of virtue. Anything more, and you were asking for it. Whatever it was. Now for your historical fact of the night. Red cheeks were sometimes considered literal signs of sin. A medieval physician named Gilbertus Anglicus wrote that facial flushing could indicate overheating of the blood, which was linked to lust. So if you flushed naturally, risky. If you faked a flush, more risky. You were either sinful or trying to look sinful, and the distinction was often irrelevant. And here's your fringe fact. Some women used crushed insects, cochineal beetles to be specific, to colour their cheeks. Imported from the East, dried, ground, and mixed into wax or oil, the beetles produced an intense red pigment. Exotic, rare, and dangerously expensive. It was a secret weapon. Nobles prized it. Apothecaries hoarded it. One English countess reportedly had it locked in a silver box with a miniature key she wore around her neck. Her servant once stole a pinch of it and sold it at market for enough to buy a new cloak. But not all women had access to beetles and coral, so others turned to more rustic methods, rubbing the skin with nettles, pinching the cheeks until they turned raw, smearing a mixture of goose grease and crushed cherries, then blotting it just enough to look accidental. Pain was part of the ritual, that slight sting, a reminder that beauty was earned, and again, the church had opinions. Of course it did. Some preachers said rouge on the face was like painting flames on your soul. Others claimed it interfered with the natural humours of the body. And a few particularly dramatic friars liked to quote the book of Isaiah. Woe to the women who make their faces fair. Subtle. Still, you persist. You always do. You finish your routine with the faintest smudge of colour along your jawline. Unnecessary, really, but it makes your face look warmer, less like a marble statue. You don't smile. Smiling cracks the paint. But you feel a quiet thrill in your chest, like you've pulled off a perfect forgery. And scholars today? They're still arguing about what it all meant. Was red a symbol of power or submission? Was wearing it a way to reclaim your body, or offer it up carefully packaged to society's expectations? One side says women were victims of a patriarchal trap. The other says they were strategists, using red as camouflage, as armour. Maybe both are right. Maybe you're both victim and strategist, painted, powdered, and pulling the strings. Outside, the bell rings for morning prayers. You stand, adjusting your veil, keeping your face still so nothing smudges. As you walk down the hall, the torches flicker and catch your profile in fragments. A little light on the cheek, a little shadow at the lip. You look soft, gentle, holy, and behind the blush, fire. You sit cross-legged on the cold floor, candle flickering beside you, and lift what looks like a small, delicate brush, but it's not made of bristles. It's bone. Carved and whittled, smooth by hand, probably a generation ago, maybe longer. It fits in your palm perfectly, like it belongs there, like it always has. The tip is stained with something reddish-brown, old rouge or rust or maybe dried blood. You don't ask. Tools like this don't come with histories, only rituals. This is what you use to scrape. Not skin, at least not tonight, but hair. Stray hairs that grow where they shouldn't. Under your chin, at the edges of your lips, the unfortunate line that threatens to form between your brows. You're not supposed to have hair like that. A woman's face must be clean, smooth, free of wildness. You've been taught this since childhood. Hair is disorder. Hair is masculine. Hair is temptation waiting to happen. So you scrape, you pluck, you tweeze, slowly, painfully. The sharp end of the bone tool digs into your skin, tugging at follicles like tiny punishments. You wince, but you keep going. The result, bare skin, taut and unbroken, is worth it. At least that's what you tell yourself. You're aiming for that holy look again, a face like milk and wax, soft and quiet and impossible to read. Tonight, you've decided to go further. Your friend, if you can call her that, competition being what it is, told you about a new method she swears by. Take a strip of linen, soak it in a mixture of boiled sugar, lemon juice, and ashes. Let it dry, then heat it slightly over a flame. Press yank. She said it like it was a spell, and in a way, it is. A painful, sticky, absolutely insane spell that rips out everything in its path, so you try it. The scream that wants to come out doesn't. You bite your lip, breathe through your nose, your eyes water as the cloth peels away with a sound like tearing silk. You don't even look to see what came off. You don't want to know. You just know it's working. You're becoming smooth, pure, proper. This all sounds excessive, but for a medieval woman, grooming is survival. It's not just about beauty, it's about legitimacy. A patch of facial hair can spark rumours of devil's marks. A mole in the wrong place, a rough patch of skin, signs of sin, or worse, witchcraft. There's a reason women keep razors and needles tucked into their sewing baskets. A reason you always have a small mirror hidden behind your prayer book. You are your own inquisitor, your own executioner. And the tools, God, the tools. Tweezers made of iron, razors with carved bone handles, hot wax mixtures that smell like scorched sugar and animal fat. There's a comb made from fish bone that's supposed to smooth away facial hair, but it only works if you rub it with vinegar first. And don't forget the pumice stone, used for exfoliating your face until it's raw, then soothed with goose grease. Goose grease. Your beauty routine is one part alchemy, one part masochism. Here's a historical fact that'll make your skin crawl. In some aristocratic courts, women used hot irons, yes, actual branding tools, to remove facial blemishes. Not often, but enough that there are records of it. A noblewoman in Provence supposedly branded a mole on her cheek to avoid being labelled a witch. It scarred her, but she was never questioned again. It was proof, they said, of her piety. As if pain was a sacrament. And now for the fringe detail. Some women sewed human hair into their scalp to make their hairline appear higher. You've already heard about plucking the hairline to create that holy dome of forehead. But some went further. After overplucking or suffering from hair loss, often due to, all the poison and stress, they'd take strands from a sister or servant and stitch them beneath their skin. The wounds would crust over, sometimes become infected, but if the hair took root, the result was miraculous. A smooth, rounded frame for the face, just like the saints. And yet, despite all this pain, despite the bleeding and blistering, you keep at it. Because it's not just about appearance, it's about control. You don't get many choices in this world, not about marriage or land or your own thoughts, but you can control this. The way you look, the way you're seen. It's not empowerment in the modern sense, it's survival through compliance. If you're beautiful, by their standards, you're safe. Or at least safer. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some say the tools themselves are cursed. One old woman in your village claims the bone brush you used was originally a needle for sewing shrouds. She says it belonged to a woman who died of the plague and came back in dreams to curse her. Mirror. Another says that women who tamper too much with their faces are reborn as birds, trapped in feathered bodies, unable to speak. Folklore, yes, but the warning is clear. Beauty is dangerous when it becomes obsession. You're beginning to see the lines where that obsession begins. You no longer feel nervous before the rituals. You feel relief, like you're doing what's required, like each plucked hair is a little penance paid, a tithe of pain. You've heard of women flaying their own hands to resist temptation, sleeping on straw mats lined with nettles, tying rocks to their backs to keep from sleeping too long. Your routine? Not so different, just quieter, more acceptable. Scholars still argue, was this grooming a form of devotion? Or was it self-harm dressed up in righteousness? Did these women believe they were honouring God with each drop of blood they bled for beauty? Or were they just trapped in a system that measured their worth in smoothness and silence? The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between the bone tools and the whispered prayers. You rinse your face with cool water, dabbing gently with a linen cloth that's already stained from previous nights. The pain is still fresh, but the skin is smooth, smoother than yesterday. You look in the mirror. The candle flickers behind you. Your face is pale, hairline high, brows invisible. There's nothing wild left. You look holy. You blow out the candle, leaving the room in darkness. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. You're not quite sure when it started. This idea that your morning routine might also double as a spell. That your powders and creams, your tweezers and tinctures, weren't just tools of beauty, but tools of power. Maybe it was the whispers in the marketplace. Maybe it was the way the old widow looked at you when you passed, her eyes catching the shimmer on your cheeks like it was unnatural. Or maybe it was just the way people talked. Quietly, suspiciously, when a woman looked too good. You stand before your mirror now, one hand holding a tin of lead paste, the other cradling a small pot of crushed herbs and rose oil, innocent enough ingredients on their own. But when combined, when painted across the lips of a woman who then catches the eye of a man who'd previously ignored her, suddenly the line between beauty and witchcraft gets very, very blurry. In medieval Europe, looking beautiful could get you accused of sorcery. Not overtly at first. No one bursts into your chamber screaming "witch" just because you're radiant at a feast. It starts more subtly. A murmur about how you never age. A passing comment about how your skin stays pale even after a summer outdoors. A joke. Haha. Maybe she uses nightshade in her bath. And then, one day, someone goes missing, or falls ill, or simply looks at you wrong, and suddenly, that joke's not a joke anymore. There's a long history of conflating beauty with dark power. Eve, after all, was too beautiful to resist. Delilah too seductive to trust. The medieval church made it clear, woman is temptation. And what tempts more effectively than a flawless face, lips like fruit, skin like untouched snow? No surprise, then, that makeup itself was often treated as a form of deception. And deception, in the eyes of the clergy, was the devil's tool. You remember an old story told by a visiting friar, about a young woman who mixed a cream of crushed lilies and goat fat, rubbed it across her chest and bewitched an entire village. Or so he claimed. He said she died screaming, her soul dragged to hell by demons who looked like men she'd seduced. Everyone in the room had nodded gravely. You, meanwhile, had quietly stopped applying your rose oil, just for a few days. But it didn't last. You missed the feeling of control, the way people looked at you, the way you looked at yourself. It's not that you believe the rumours, that your beauty is unnatural, ungodly, but you're careful now. You store your powders in jars marked as medicine. You pray a little louder while applying them, just in case someone's listening through the door. Here's your historical fact for the night. In several 14th century ecclesiastical courts, women were charged not for poisoning or murder, but for altering their appearance to entrap men. That was the phrase. Entrapment through beauty. One case in Toulouse described a woman who used mystical unguents to whiten her skin and was accused of interfering with God's will. She was sentenced to public penance and banned from church for a year. Her unguents? Almond oil and chalk. That's it. Now, your fringe detail. In parts of Eastern Europe, certain beauty rituals were categorized as soft sorcery. Using henna to darken hair. Sorcery. Creating a balm to prevent wrinkles. Sorcery. Even combing your hair at night while speaking prayers backward was enough to draw suspicion. There's a surviving household manual from Hungary that lists over 50 forbidden acts, and nearly half involve cosmetics, perfume or grooming. One entry warns women not to look into a mirror by candlelight, lest you see the devil's eye staring back. You'd laugh if it weren't so close to what you already feel. There's something uncanny about your own reflection at night. The way candlelight smooths out your features, turns your eyes into hollows, makes your skin glow in a way that doesn't feel entirely alive. You understand why people might think you're casting spells. After all, you do change with your rituals. Each touch of rouge or powder transforms you from girl to lady, from human to vision. And maybe, In a world where women aren't allowed power, any transformation is inherently suspicious. That's the unspoken truth, isn't it? The fear wasn't that you were magical. It was that you might be powerful. Even today, you catch the looks. The way people react when you enter a room, perfectly composed, skin flawless, eyes lined in soft charcoal. Some smile, others stare too long. But a few, always men of the cloth, or old women with rosaries wound too tight around their fingers, look at you with something like fear, like they think you chose this power for yourself, like you stole it. And maybe you did. Maybe every morning you rise and paint your face, you're reclaiming a piece of control, not just over how you look, but how you're perceived. You've learned to weaponize their expectations, to turn modesty into mystique, restraint into allure, holiness into spectacle. It's not magic, but it might as well be. There's another story you think about sometimes. A woman in Florence, wealthy, respected, married to a guild leader. She was said to have the eyes of a Madonna and the mouth of Venus. When her husband died suddenly, the whispers began. Poisoned wine, they said, a charm placed under the bed. When they searched her home, they found dozens of jars and bottles, most of them unlabelled. Her defenders said it was just cosmetics. Her enemies said it was witchcraft. No trial, no evidence, just a quiet disappearance. Her house sold. Her name struck from the parish book. You don't keep your jars unlabelled anymore. You kneel beside your bed now, fingers still scented with frankincense, and fold your hands in prayer. Forgive me, you whisper, though you're not sure for what. For wanting to be beautiful? For being beautiful? For surviving in a world that punishes both? The candle crackles. The mirror across the room reflects only shadows, and you think, for just a moment, that maybe you do believe in magic. Just a little. You're veiled today, not because you're mourning or on pilgrimage or feeling especially devout, but because it's expected. The veil is long, ivory, a thin woven linen that hangs like mist from the crown of your head down to your shoulders. It's pinned beneath your chin and fastened so tightly it flattens your ears, making them ache a little. You glance in the mirror, and there she is again, that serene, faceless silhouette. Modesty, weaponized. A curtain between you and the world. The veil is more than an accessory. It's a declaration. You are pure. You're controlled. You're not to be looked upon unless granted permission, and even then, barely. The less of you seen, the more of you imagined. That's the whole trick. In the Middle Ages, modesty isn't just a virtue. It's a kind of stagecraft. There's no one veil style, of course. You've seen everything from simple hair coverings to elaborate wimples that wrap around the throat and chin like armour. Some women wear veils that trail behind them like bridal trains. Others wrap their faces so tightly only their eyes peek. Through. You've heard of one noble woman in Bruges who had her veil stitched to her gown so that if anyone tried to lift it without her consent, it would tear the whole thing. Now that's security, and it's not just the veil, it's what it means, what it hides. In your world, the most powerful women are often the least visible. You grow up believing that concealment is power, that a covered head means a covered soul. That the more of yourself you hide, the more they will believe you have something sacred to protect. But of course, that's only half the truth. You also know how the veil can work in reverse. You've seen women use it strategically, slipping it just slightly off the forehead to show a high hairline, or letting the fabric fall at a perfect diagonal across the cheek to catch the candlelight. You once watched a baroness rearrange her veil during a feast so subtly that the entire room seemed to lean forward to see what might lie beneath. It's not stripping, it's suggestion, and it's more powerful than nudity could ever be. There's a strange tension in your veil. On one hand, it's modest, on the other, it draws attention. By hiding your face, you're inviting the imagination to run wild. What colour are her eyes? Does she smile when she speaks? Does her mouth curve when she prays? You become a mystery. And in a culture where women are rarely allowed to speak for themselves, mystery becomes currency. Here's your historical fact of the day. By law, many medieval cities required women to wear veils in public. In 13th century Paris, for example, women were legally required to cover their heads once they reached puberty. In Florence, even married women were fined for showing their hair in public. Veiling wasn't optional, it was compulsory. To walk unveiled was to walk into sin, or at least to invite comment. Now for your fringe detail, Some women faked veiling. Yes, really. There are records of women, particularly in cosmopolitan cities, wearing transparent veils made of silk gauze or spider thread linen, technically complying with the law but revealing more than they hid. One tailor in Venice was arrested for selling indecent veils, which sounds like an oxymoron but was apparently a real problem. The church tried to crack down on this, issuing edicts that veils must be opaque, plain and without embellishment, which of course made women want to embellish them even more. But the veil isn't just a legal accessory, it's an emotional one. You've worn it when you didn't want to be seen, when your skin was blotchy, when your rouge wouldn't set, when your eyes were red from crying, or from too many sleepless nights obsessing over how you'll be perceived. On those days, the veil becomes a shield, not for modesty but for privacy, for sanity, for self. Still, there's always the fear. If your veil slips too far, if a lock of hair escapes, if your cheek is exposed during the wrong sermon, you risk scrutiny. A veiled woman is virtuous. An unveiled woman? Well, why was her veil undone? Was it an accident? Was it seduction? Was it a sign of inner looseness? That's the problem with medieval beauty standards, they're designed to be unwinnable. Too much veil? You're cold, inaccessible, a prude. Too little? You're dangerous, desperate, maybe even diabolical. The sweet spot is somewhere in between. A perfectly timed breeze lifting your veil just enough to catch the corner of your lip, your eye, your God-approved cheekbone. You walk through the cloister garden now, veil fluttering slightly in the breeze, and catch a reflection in a pool of water. You don't look like yourself. You look like the idea of yourself, soft, glowing, shrouded in virtue. It's almost enough to believe the performance, and that's what it is really. Performance. Every woman you know wears a veil differently. Some tie it tight, like a noose. Some drape it loose and low, defiant. One girl you knew wore hers pinned with tiny rose thorns. Every time she moved, she bled a little. For penance, she said. But everyone knew she liked the attention. You admired her for it. You think of the widows, all in black, their veils long and trailing like shadows. You think of the brides, veils dotted with pearls, symbols of purity, as if a piece of cloth could erase the life lived before marriage. And you think of the heretics, those burned at the stake, unveiled and wild-haired, the church demanding they die with their shame exposed. Modern scholars still wrestle with this. Was the veil a tool of oppression or empowerment? Did it reduce women to objects or allow them to reclaim their own gaze? Was it a symbol of submission or one of control? The answer is frustrating. It depends. On the day, the woman, the context, the angle of sunlight on a silk hem. Back inside, you unpin the veil, slowly, with the reverence of removing armour. Your scalp aches, your ears throb, but your face is untouched. Still smooth, still painted, still yours. You lay the veil on the bed and exhale for the first time in hours. Without it, the room feels louder. You feel more there, exposed, but free. Tomorrow, you'll wear it again. But for now, just for a moment, you let your hair down. The cloister walls hum with bees this morning, thick with the scent of lavender and something else, something sharper, almost metallic. You follow the sound through a side corridor, into the garden where Sister Theodora tends her plants. She's bent low, hands deep in a row of wormwood, lips moving in a silent psalm. You don't disturb her. You just watch, trying not to look too interested. After all, what happens here isn't strictly allowed, because beneath the chant and prayer and ritual, behind the incense and the stern glances of abbesses and the scraped knees of novice girls, there's another world inside the convent. A world of jars and powders and clippings of bark tucked into recipe books disguised as devotional texts. These women, these veiled, God-fearing, supposedly renounced creatures, know more about beauty than most nobles. They're cloistered, yes, but they're not naive. You finally gather the courage to approach. Sister Theodora doesn't look up, just gestures for you to kneel beside her. She hands you a sprig of dried sage and murmurs, "This, when steeped in goat milk, softens the skin." You nod like it's a prayer. In a way, it is. The convent is where women learn to disappear from the world, but not from themselves. You would think the cloister would kill vanity, that the long hours of silence and self-denial would scrub out every desire for beauty. But you've learned that beauty takes different forms here. It's not about seduction or admiration. It's about care, control, private ritual, and maybe in its quietest, purest sense, defiance. The nuns aren't immune to appearance. Many entered the cloister not from spiritual calling but from family strategy. They were too poor to marry, or too clever to be trusted in court. Now they wake at dawn, pray until their knees ache, and grow the very herbs that once decorated palace perfumes. And in their private cells, between candlelit pages of Latin prayers, they press rose petals into water, blend honey into ash, and line their eyes with charcoal made from burnt myrtle leaves. You've heard of one nun who boiled wine into syrup and used it as cheek stain. Another who soaked her habit's sleeves in lavender oil before Vespers, so the scent would rise when she prayed. Subtle, controlled, holy. Here's your historical fact of the day. In several 12th and 13th century convents, especially across Italy and Germany, there are surviving letters from nuns describing cosmetic recipes. Not just for medicinal salves, those were expected, but for hair lightening, skin whitening, even lip balms. One nun wrote to her sister outside the convent for crushed pearl powder and beeswax. Another requested saffron to brighten the eyes for more fervent worship. And it worked, because in the convent, if you could link beauty to devotion, it was allowed. That's the trick. These women didn't paint to tempt, they painted to transcend. I adorn myself for Christ, one abbess wrote in her journal. For what is purity if not seen? She wasn't punished, she was admired, and yet there's tension. Not everyone in the convent approves. Some sisters scowl when they see someone spending too long at the font, adjusting her veil or smoothing her hair. One girl was reprimanded for staring at her reflection in the brass water basin too often. They say she carved her own face into the corner of a psalter. No one's confirmed it. But when that psalter disappeared, so did her vanity. Still, the rituals continue, quietly, respectfully. There's a long-standing practice of masking cosmetics as medicine. If someone notices the faint flush on your cheeks, you're treating a fever. If your lips are redder than usual, you've been chewing medicinal licorice root for throat pain. If your skin glows beneath your veil, you've simply been blessed with health from prayer and clean eating. Everyone nods. No one says a word. You try it yourself. A paste of rosewater and crushed barley. It smells earthy and sweet. You apply it at night and wake up feeling like you've remembered something ancient, something women have passed hand to hand for centuries. It's not about impressing anyone. No one sees you here. But you do. And maybe that's the whole point. Now for the fringe detail. Some convents kept what they called herbariums or still rooms, spaces filled with drying herbs, distillation equipment, and even stills for making scented oils. These weren't just medical labs, they were proto-cosmetic factories. Recipes passed from sister to sister included ingredients like honey, camphor, egg whites, ground shell, lemon juice, and even frog spawn. The goal? Not only to cure ailments, but to maintain the clearness of God's temple. Their bodies, even cloistered, were still seen as vessels for grace, and vessels had to be clean. You take a moment to imagine what it would have been like to be Sister Theodora at 16, new to the convent, confused, likely angry, forced to surrender your voice, your lineage, your very name, but not your hands, not your knowledge. She learned what plants healed, what flowers stained, what roots turned into salves. She learned to express through tincture what she couldn't say aloud, and now she passes it to you, like a secret written in herbs. Scholars argue whether these beauty rituals were signs of resistance or assimilation. Did the nuns practice private beauty as a way of holding on to their femininity, their pre-cloister identities? Or did they genuinely believe their care routines brought them closer to God? Was a powdered face still a sin if it was seen by no one but the Saviour? It's a blurry line, like a veil caught in wind. But perhaps that ambiguity was the whole point. These women, cloistered and silent, still found ways to own themselves. In gardens, in cellars, in small quiet rituals that smelled of lavender and sacrifice. You finish grinding a bit of dried rosemary in your mortar, glancing once more at Theodora. She finally looks at you, just for a second, and nods. It isn't a smile. It's an acknowledgement. You're learning. You're joining the tradition. Not the loud, public one. The secret lineage of women who knew that even in silence they had ways of being seen. The pews are hard and unwelcoming, carved from old oak worn smooth by centuries of penitence. You sit with your hands folded in your lap, eyes fixed on the stone floor, trying to look appropriately humbled. Above you, the voice of the priest rolls out from the pulpit, echoing against the cold walls like the sound of thunder that never arrives. He's preaching on vanity today, again, and every word lands like a small slap. You try not to twitch. He says women are the gatekeepers of sin, that your face, your voice, your very body is temptation made flesh. He gestures to the crucifix, the suffering Christ, and says, "It was woman who first invited ruin." You've heard this sermon before from this priest and others like him. Sometimes it's about the painted face. Sometimes it's about the decorated body. This time, it's the mirror. Vanity is the sister of pride, he says, and pride is the devil's firstborn daughter. You nod along because that's what you're meant to do, but inside something itches. You think of the small mirror you keep hidden in your chamber, the one that once belonged to your grandmother, burnished metal and warped by age. You look into it every morning, not with pride, not with lust, but with necessity, with discipline, with the careful attention of someone who knows how little it takes to be deemed wrong. The Church's opinions on beauty are not subtle. They are inscribed in law, in custom, in the very design of your daily life. According to the sermons, you are supposed to be plain, humble, ashen even, but not ugly. That too is a sin, evidence of sloth or poor hygiene. You're supposed to keep yourself tidy, clean, modest, but never alluring. You must glow, but not sparkle. Be soft, but not inviting. Be beautiful, but never know it. It's impossible, and the Church knows it. That's the secret, the part you realise the older you get. The standard is meant to be unreachable, a moral labyrinth with no exit. That way the system never loses. If you fall short, you're punished. If you succeed, you're suspicious. And through it all, the pulpit speaks with certainty, pretending these contradictions aren't just real, but divinely inspired. Here's your historical fact. Multiple church councils throughout the Middle Ages issued official statements condemning women's use of cosmetics. The Synod of Rouen in 1231 declared it an affront to God's design, to alter one's appearance with paint or powder. Other decrees warned that such practices invited demonic influence, particularly when paired with unseemly garments or enticing scents. The logic was simple. If you made yourself beautiful on purpose, you must have something unholy to gain from it. And yet, priests also praised the beauty of certain women, just not real ones. They extolled the Virgin Mary's fairness, her untouched skin, her eternal youth. They described heaven as a place where all souls would be restored to their most glorious form. In artwork, saints were depicted as radiant, unblemished, physically perfect. So which is it? Is beauty godly or godless? Is it divine reward or sinful bait? You've heard some sermons that try to split the difference. They say that natural beauty is a gift from God, but artificial beauty is theft. That makes you laugh, quietly. Because what's natural about smearing ashes on your face to hide rosacea? About plucking your hairline until your scalp bleeds? About lacing yourself so tightly your ribs ache for days? There is no natural left, only ritual. The priest begins listing sins again, each one marked by a pointed glance toward the women's side of the congregation. He doesn't look at the men. Not once. You wonder if he's ever worried about the cut of his robes, the shine of his boots, the faint rose water he uses to mask the mildew on his breath. Of course not. His body isn't temptation. Only yours is. You remember when you were younger, and a friar caught you retying your veil in the reflection of a basin. The devil watches through mirrors, he said. Best not give him an invitation. You blushed, not out of guilt but rage. But you learned. You stopped adjusting yourself in public. You learned to do everything in secret, behind closed doors, before dawn. Not to avoid vanity, but to avoid scrutiny. Now for your fringe fact. In some monastic orders, women were required to confess beauty-related sins during weekly examinations. These included excessive grooming, delight in one's reflection, and conversations about physical appearance. A nun in 14th century France was famously punished for confessing that she had prayed to remain youthful in her sleep. Her punishment: 7 days of silence and 3 nights of sleeping on the floor. And yet, despite all this, the Church didn't stop beauty culture. It shaped it. By defining the boundaries, by naming the sins, it made them real. Women didn't just paint their faces, they painted within lines drawn by the pulpit. If a priest said rouge was sinful, they switched to crushed strawberries. If face paint was forbidden, they lightened their skin with chalk and claimed it was medicinal. If mirrors were banned, they polished bowls or stared into water. The church didn't erase vanity, it ritualized it. There's a strange freedom in realizing this. You're not delusional, you're not damned. You're just playing the game, one sermon at a time, one powder, one prayer, one breath held during a scolding. You don't believe everything they say, but you understand why they say it. The sermon ends. You stand with the others, head bowed, veil adjusted just so. The priest's eyes scan the crowd, lingering a little too long on the girl beside you. Young, flushed, face still damp from tears, you want to take her hand to tell her she doesn't have to be so small, but you don't. You've learned better than that. Outside, the air is cool. You take a breath and feel the heaviness lift just a little. Your skin is still smooth beneath the veil. Your lips still tinted from this morning's balm. You walk forward, careful and silent, knowing that somewhere behind you, the pulpit is already preparing its next list of sins. The cart rolls through the village like a bell with no clapper. Silent, but every head turns. The smell comes first, sickly sweet and heavy, riding the wind like a warning. The bodies are stacked with a kind of hurried reverence, draped in linen where there's enough cloth to spare, faces turned toward the heavens. Some eyes are still open. The women nearby cross themselves instinctively. You do too, though your fingers pause at your lips, because under your breath all you're thinking is, what would she have worn today? It's a cruel thought. You know it, but it's true. Because even now, in the middle of death, beauty hasn't vanished. If anything, it's gotten sharper, more desperate. You've seen women apply rouge to corpses, mothers dabbing colour on their daughters' cheeks before burial, wives smoothing wax over their husband's brow, as if death could be tricked by presentation. They do it not just to honour the dead, but to soften the blow for the living. A beautiful corpse is easier to mourn. It looks more like sleep, more like hope. In the wake of the Black Death, you'd think cosmetics would disappear, tossed aside like straw mattresses and tainted water. But no, they evolve, fast. Death is everywhere, on doorsteps, in wells, in churchyards so full that the bones of last week's dead poke through the soil. And still, you watch women in mourning veils dabbing a bit of elderberry juice on their lips before stepping into the chapel. You hear of noblewomen hiring apothecaries to concoct new mixtures, ones that promise to preserve the bloom, even as the plague eats through the city walls. You do it too. This morning you applied powder beneath your veil before walking to the chapel. Not for vanity, not even for routine, but because you're terrified of looking sick. Pale is good, pale is holy, but too pale, that means you're next. So you add just a hint of warmth to your face, like a mask saying, I'm healthy, I'm untouched, I still belong here. Here's your historical fact. During the plague years of the 14th century, the sale of cosmetics and perfumed salves increased. Not decreased, increased. Apothecaries saw record demand for items like scented wax tablets, rosewater balms, white lead powder, and odour masks made of vinegar-soaked cloth. Some were believed to prevent infection, others were purely cosmetic. Either way, beauty didn't take a break, it doubled down. Because survival isn't just about health, it's about visibility. In plague times, being seen as weak or ill could mean exile, or worse. Servants abandoned households where the mistress looked too pale. Neighbours stopped sharing bread. Priests refused to visit, so women learned to fake vitality. A hint of rouge to fake a feverless glow, lip colour to mask cyanotic lips, eye powder to deflect from the dark rings of exhaustion. You wore your health like costume, like armour. And yes, some of it is vanity. Of course it is, because in times like these, beauty becomes rebellion. A bright cheek against a grey world, a smooth face in a land of decay. When everyone is dying, looking alive feels like defiance, like proof that you're still here. But there's also something tender in it, a kind of desperate love. You've seen women painting the faces of the dead with shaking hands, weeping softly as they trace colour into lips that no longer speak. They say it's to honour the body, to give the soul a better send-off. But it's also for them, for the living, to remember the face they loved before it turned to ruin. There's a girl in your village who did this for her sister. The younger one died in the night. No warning, no final confession, just silence. The elder stayed up all night, crushing rose petals and chalk into a paste, then painting her sister's face with fingers so gentle it felt like prayer. In the morning she wrapped her in linen and placed a ring of dried lavender around her head. When the corpse cart came, the driver paused. "Too pretty for the pit," he muttered. He buried her at the edge of the churchyard instead. That's your fringe fact tonight. Some plague victims, especially women, received more careful burials if they looked peaceful, composed, even beautiful in death. It wasn't official policy, but it happened. Because when death is everywhere, you cling to whatever dignity you can salvage, even if it comes from powder and paint. You walk through the streets now, veil over your mouth, rouge beneath it. You don't speak. The air is thick with incense and rot. A monk walks past carrying a crucifix and a bucket of lime. His robes are stained, and his eyes look everywhere but at the bodies. But he nods when he sees you, because you look healthy, quiet, devout, the look of the living, and yet every step you take you feel it pressing in. The realization that beauty has become a kind of mourning, not just for those who've passed, but for the world that used to be. A world where red cheeks meant flirtation, where pale skin meant privilege. Now, they're masks against fear. You still perform the rituals, because they're all you have left. You still open your mirror each morning, not to admire, just to confirm you haven't vanished. Scholars often overlook this, the way plague sharpened the beauty standard into something fierce and tragic. They talk about medicine and mortality and the economy, but not the women who lined the eyes of their dead sisters, or kissed the forehead of a powdered corpse before letting her go. They miss the soft defiance of a woman combing her hair while the world crumbles. You return home at dusk and remove your veil. The rouge has faded, but the illusion held long enough. You wash your face with lavender water, just a splash, and sit by the window, watching the last light fall across empty streets. Tomorrow you'll do it all again, not because it's safe, not because it's sane, but because in a world that's losing its face, you're still trying to keep yours. You've seen it before, but today it feels different, almost cruel. The fashion is changing again, and it's relentless. Sleeves stretched to the ground, trailing like ribbons behind you, impossibly wide at the cuffs. Skirts balloon out so far that walking through a narrow doorway becomes a careful dance, a negotiation of space and fabric. Shoes grow long and pointed, so sharp at the toe they could pierce a grape. You watch ladies at court, their bodies trapped in layers of heavy brocade and stiffened linen, each step a study in endurance. You slip into your gown and feel the weight settle like a cage. The fabric is stiff, embroidered with gold thread that catches the candlelight but doesn't comfort. Your arms are pinned by sleeves so wide they almost obscure your hands. You can't help but wonder how women manage to eat, to tend to children, to move at all in these ridiculous costumes. But manage they do, because fashion is power, and power isn't gentle. Corsetry hasn't arrived yet, but the effect is similar. Women are shaped by clothing, forced into the impossible ideal. A narrow waist, a broad chest, shoulders that seem to stretch wider than nature intended. It's not just for show, it's a statement. This is who I am. Wealthy, refined, worthy of attention, and don't you forget it. But all this grandeur comes with a price. Walking, sitting, even breathing can feel like a challenge. You've heard stories of women who fainted during court events because the constriction was so severe. Others developed bruises from the weight of their skirts or cuts from tight lacing. Some resorted to risky measures just to keep up, tightening their waists beyond what was safe, starving themselves, or even binding their arms to maintain posture. Historical records tell of women in the Burgundian court who wore sleeves so heavy they had attendants to help them dress and undress. The fabrics were imported from Italy and the East, dyed in vibrant blues and reds that bled when washed. Jewellery was sewn directly onto gowns, making the dress as valuable as any treasure chest. The more elaborate your costume, the more influence you wielded. Then there's the shoe game, a bizarre obsession with elongated toes known as poulain or crackaway. These pointed shoes extended several inches beyond the actual foot, some curling up at the tips like the claws of a beast. Nobles wore them proudly, but they were impractical and dangerous. Some women reportedly tripped and broke ankles trying to navigate cobblestone streets. In some cities, laws were passed limiting the length of these toes, though enforcement was spotty at best. Here's a fringe fact that's fun to imagine. To protect their delicate gowns and shoes, some ladies carried small decorated sticks, called points, which they used to push aside brambles or warn off would-be touchers in crowded halls. You can picture it now, a lady flicking her point at a too curious courtier, a quick snap of her wrist like a warning that her beauty is not to be trifled with. All these fashions don't just shape bodies, they shape identities. You watch the noble women at the banquet, their figures silhouettes behind yards of fabric and shimmering jewels. They don't just wear clothes, they wear status, history, family pride. The gowns tell stories, the length of sleeves whispers lineage, the quality of thread announces alliances. But not everyone thrives in this world. Poorer women, peasants, servants, they watch and mimic when they can, but are often left out of the spectacle entirely. For them, fashion is an aspiration rather than a reality. They wear hand-me-downs, patched dresses and wooden clogs. Their beauty isn't judged by silk, but by survival. And then there's the debate that still rages among historians today. Did these fashions empower women, or enslave them? Some argue that elaborate clothing gave noble women a kind of armour, protection from unwanted labour, a visual barrier to male aggression. Others say the restrictions were physical and psychological chains, limiting movement and autonomy. You think of the women who lived through this, who squeezed into gowns that weighed as much as a child, who held themselves upright despite aching backs and strained lungs. You think of the silent compromises behind every sigh and every forced smile. Beauty was a battlefield, and these dresses were both sword and shield. Tonight you remove your gown slowly, untying the laces with trembling fingers. The heavy fabric slips to the floor with a whisper. Your skin feels raw and liberated beneath it. You breathe deeply, savouring the feeling of freedom, even if just for a moment. Tomorrow the fashion will change again, and you'll dress accordingly. Jewels glint in the candlelight like tiny stars fallen onto velvet and silk. You reach for a delicate chain of powdered pearls, pearls crushed so finely they resemble morning mist, and let the faint dust fall through your fingers. It's both treasure and poison. You know that. The same with the emerald powder you've been told is the height of fashion, though some whisper it's as deadly as the lead in your face paint. Still, women adorn themselves with these substances because status demands it. Wealth is shown not just through gold or fabric, but through the very chemicals you wear on your skin. You consider the finer points of adornment. Emeralds ground into a cosmetic paste, powdered pearls mixed with honey for lip balm, even the occasional trace of mercury in eyeshadows. These were not mere decorations, but statements of class, connections, and often a willingness to flirt with danger. The richer you are, the more exquisite and toxic your beauty regimen could be. Poison was a byproduct of luxury. In fact, the use of powdered gemstones in cosmetics is one of the quirks of medieval fashion that modern sensibilities find both fascinating and alarming. Emeralds, for instance, were crushed to create a pale green tint believed to cool flushed skin, but many women suffered from skin irritation, or worse, mercury poisoning, which was often linked to the mineral's use. Pearls, similarly, were ground into powders to lighten the complexion and smooth wrinkles, luxury treatments accessible only to the upper echelons of society. There's a curious tension here between beauty and death. Women wore these poisons knowingly, sometimes hoping their fragile, pale skin would outlast the toxicity. Others had no choice, trapped in cycles of expectation and appearance. A noblewoman's duty wasn't just to rule estates or bear heirs, it was to look like power, even if that meant sacrificing her health. Here's your historical fact for tonight. Powdered emeralds were so prized that in 15th century Italy, some apothecaries guarded their sources zealously, mixing emerald powder with waxes and oils to make cosmetics that were part medical treatment, part beautification. However, some medical texts also warned about the green sickness, or chlorosis, a term often used to describe the pale, sickly complexion of women exposed to heavy metals and mineral powders. The irony is sharp. What was applied to beautify might also cause illness. And here's the fringe fact. There are tales, likely exaggerated, of noble women who intentionally overdosed on these powders to keep their youthful looks, even as their bodies failed them. One story tells of a duchess who mixed emerald dust with lead-based face powder, leading to a slow, agonizing decline marked by tremors and madness. Whether legend or truth, it reflects the dangerous allure of beauty in the Middle Ages. You imagine the ritual. A lady seated in her chambers, the floor strewn with crushed stones, her servants carefully applying toxic paste with fine brushes. You wonder if she ever paused to ask if it was worth it, to weigh the price of beauty against the cost of health. And there's the social gamble. If you refuse these treatments, you risk being seen as ugly, or worse, poor and unworthy. If you embrace them, you might outshine rivals, but at the cost of your vitality. The stakes are high, the rules unspoken but rigid. The tension ripples beyond cosmetics too, into the realm of politics and marriage. A young woman's appearance was often the first and last impression a powerful family made. Toxic or not, beauty was currency. You knew this well. You hold the chain of powdered pearls again, turning it over in your fingers. The weight is light, but the implications are heavy. Beauty here is a dangerous game, one that many played, but few won without scars. You set the chain down gently and reach for a small bottle of mercury-based highlighter. It glimmers ominously, like liquid silver. Tomorrow you'll prepare the mixture anew. For now, you sit in silence, the flickering candle casting dancing shadows that seem almost alive, like spirits watching over your dangerous ritual. You hold your breath as you lift the mirror, a rare treasure crafted from blown glass and polished metal, its surface imperfect but still reflecting you better than any bronze disc ever could. The first time you held one of these fragile things, you were mesmerized. For centuries, mirrors were scarce, expensive luxuries only the wealthiest could own. The rest of the world relied on polished metal or still pools of water, where reflections shimmered and warped, teasing out ghostly versions of yourself. Now, looking into this fragile glass, you catch yourself studying every line and shadow with a new kind of obsession. You trace the curve of your cheekbone, the slight furrow of your brow, the edges of your plucked hairline. The mirror doesn't just reflect your image, it magnifies your doubts, your aspirations, your fears. It whispers that beauty is a moving target, one that changes with every candle flicker and passing day. Before glass mirrors, self-perception was a blurry, imperfect thing. Artists relied on imagination or sketches from others to capture faces. But now, with these new mirrors spreading across Europe in the late Middle Ages, women began to see themselves more clearly, sometimes too clearly. The mirror became both a tool and a tormentor, showing every flaw, every missed spot of powder, every patch of redness. It's easy to forget that this was revolutionary. Before the 14th century, mirrors were so rare that most people would never see their own face clearly outside of a crowd or the occasional pool of water. Now suddenly, you can stare into your own eyes for minutes at a time, analysing, critiquing and reshaping. The mirror became a private witness to your daily transformations, a silent judge of your rituals. Here's a historical fact. Venice became a major centre for mirror making in the late Middle Ages. Craftsmen perfected the art of blowing thin glass panes and backing them with polished tin or silver, creating clearer and larger reflections than ever before. These mirrors were costly and delicate, often sold in ornate wooden frames and treasured like relics. But mirrors weren't always welcome. Some clergy warned against their use, fearing they encouraged vanity and sinful self-obsession. There were stories, often whispered, of women entranced by their reflections, spending hours before their mirrors until they neglected prayer and duty. Some believed mirrors could trap souls or be used in witchcraft to cast spells. Looking too long into a mirror was seen by some as opening a door to temptation, or the devil's gaze, and the mirror's impact rippled through culture. Portrait painting, for example, changed dramatically. Artists began capturing not idealized versions of their subjects, but more honest likenesses, warts and all. This shift challenged medieval ideals of perfect beauty, introducing a tension between reality and aspiration. Now the scholarly debate: was the mirror liberating or enslaving? Did it empower women to see their own worth, or deepen their insecurities? Did it fuel the beauty rituals, or simply reflect the pressures already present? Scholars argue both sides. Some say mirrors gave women a new kind of agency, a way to control their image. Others see them as tools of self-surveillance, amplifying impossible standards. You catch your own gaze again, blinking slowly, aware of every imperfection. You touch a spot of lead powder near your temple, smoothing it carefully. The mirror doesn't judge, but you do. With a sigh, you set the mirror down, the surface shimmering like a pool disturbed by a stone. Tomorrow you'll face it again, as you always do, because in this world the mirror is more than glass. It's a battleground. You press your fingers lightly against your forehead, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin. Today, like so many days before, you decide to try something new to achieve that elusive glow. One that says health, but hides any hint of excess or sin. It's an old remedy, whispered down through generations, and though it sounds strange now, it made perfect sense then. Bloodletting. Yes, you bleed yourself carefully and deliberately, drawing a small amount from a vein near your temple or wrist to flush the skin and brighten the complexion. You prepare the tools with care, a sharp lancet, a clean cloth, and a small bowl to catch the trickling blood. The sharp bite stings, but isn't unbearable, more like a pinprick at first. Then the warmth spreads as the blood flows, and you let it go for just long enough to feel the flush rising in your cheeks without fainting away. It's a delicate balance practiced by many women across Europe who believed in the ancient humoral theory, that health and beauty depended on balancing the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much blood and you were lustful, wild, and unclean. Too little, and you were pale, weak, and lifeless. Bloodletting was supposed to purify the body, cleanse the soul, and sharpen the mind. You've read medical texts prescribing it not just to men, but especially to women, to cure hysteria, melancholia, and yes, to promote beauty. It was common enough that apothecaries sold lancets alongside powders and ointments, and some noble women had personal bloodletting servants trained to do it just right. The sensation of blood on your skin is at once unsettling and oddly empowering. It's a sign that your body's alive, responsive, and obedient to your will. You imagine yourself like the delicate figures painted in illuminated manuscripts, their skin glowing not just from light, but from life, flowing just beneath the surface. But the practice wasn't without risks. Overdo it, and you'd faint, grow weak, or worse. Some women who took bloodletting too far ended up anemic or worse, falling into illnesses no amount of powder could mask. You've heard of a duchess who fainted during a court banquet because of excessive bleeding. Her fainting fit became the talk of the town for weeks. There's a curious fringe fact that adds a touch of dark humour. Some medieval women even tried bloodletting on themselves before a big event, hoping the flush it created would fool everyone into thinking they'd been dancing or riding in the sun. Because a red cheek was life, vitality, if only for a few hours. And here's a scholarly debate that still fascinates historians today. Was bloodletting a genuine health practice, or was it mostly about aesthetics? Some argue that women used it as a form of cosmetic treatment, a risky but effective way to achieve a healthy glow in an age without blush. Others suggest it was deeply rooted in the humoral theory, meaning beauty and morality were physically tied to one's internal balance. You finish the ritual by washing your hands and gently patting the blood away with a clean cloth. Your forehead tingles, your cheeks are flushed as you'd hoped. You take a deep breath and look in the mirror again. The glow is subtle, but real, a sign that the sacrifice was worth it. And as you prepare for the day, you realise that every part of your beauty routine is a small act of bravery. You wield powders, poisons, and your own blood not just to please others, but to claim a little control in a world that demands perfection without mercy. You don't expect to find your beauty routine anywhere near the animal kingdom, but here you are, dipping a stiff brush into a jar filled with something strange and utterly unexpected. Fur. Not just any fur, but dog fur, soft, tangled, and somehow oddly fragrant from being mixed with a concoction of oils and crushed herbs. Your maid insists it's the secret to smoothing rough skin, calming irritated cheeks, and giving your face a subtle glow. You roll your eyes at first, but after days of flaky, dry skin that no amount of cream seems to fix, you try it. It's awkward at first, brushing coarse fur over your face, especially when you remember where it comes from. But surprisingly, the strange mixture soothes your skin. It feels like a warm, gentle caress, and the scent, part earthy, part musky, lingers, making you feel oddly grounded. dog fur, pigeon droppings, and even goose grease all find their way into beauty recipes in your world, ingredients that sound more like apothecary experiments than cosmetics. The history of these odd ingredients is as fascinating as it is bizarre. For instance, pigeon droppings, yes, actual bird poop, were believed to have exfoliating properties, so women ground them into fine powders to smooth skin. Goose grease was used as a moisturiser and to add a faint shine to hair. The idea was to use everything nature offered, no matter how strange, to create that perfect appearance. In fact, there are records from medieval England describing women carrying little bags of animal parts and powders with them at all times. They'd mix these strange ingredients in small pots, carrying their beauty toolkit like a modern makeup bag. The more exotic the item, the better. If you could afford a mix with badger fat or burnt horn, you were considered especially sophisticated. You try to imagine the scene at a market. Vendors selling buckets of animal fats, dried herbs, and odd powders, shouting over one another to sell their wares. Women haggle for the best ingredients, swapping recipes and advice in whispers. Beauty was a business, yes, but also a community. Here's your historical fact. Medieval texts called The Art of Distillation and Secrets of Women's Remedies include recipes using pigeon droppings, goose grease, and other animal-derived ingredients for everything from skincare to hair loss. These recipes were passed down in manuscripts hidden in family scrolls or written in margins of religious texts blending faith and folklore. And here's the fringe fact that makes you cringe a little. Some beauty recipes involved bathing in or applying mixtures made with ingredients like crushed snail shells, powdered bones, or even menstrual blood, believed to have magical properties. Whether people actually used these is debated, but the stories persist, showing how blurred the lines were between medicine, magic, and beauty. But this strange beauty alchemy had risks. Animal fats could spoil, causing rashes or infections. Some powders were abrasive enough to damage skin rather than heal it. Yet, the allure of flawless skin and shining hair pushed many women to experiment, willing to endure discomfort or danger for the chance at radiance. You wipe the dog fur mixture from your face after a few minutes, your skin feeling softer, but your mind swirling with the strange blend of science, superstition, and desperation behind these rituals. It's a reminder. Beauty isn't just skin deep. It's an ancient story written in the strange languages of nature and hope. You glance at the small pot and smile. Maybe it's gross, maybe it's weird, but it's yours, and in a world where so much is out of your control, that counts for something. You sit stiffly on the wooden stool, the artist's brush hovering over your cheek, waiting to capture the perfect shade of rose that you have carefully practiced in the mirror so many times before. Today, the artist is painting your portrait. Not a mere sketch, but a full-on commission that will hang in the Great Hall for all to see. The realization is thrilling and terrifying at once. You are about to be immortalized. But what if the painted version doesn't match the carefully crafted one in the mirror? What if the portrait betrays the cracks beneath your powdered skin? In the Middle Ages, portraiture was less about exact likeness and more about idealization. Painters were guided by convention, pale skin, high foreheads, delicate features, and subtle, controlled expressions. They used pigments and glazes to smooth over imperfections, to erase signs of age or fatigue, to emphasize virtue. Your portrait will show you not as you are, but as you should be, a flawless symbol of purity, status, and piety. You watch as the painter mixes colours, white lead for the base, red ochre for your cheeks, a touch of black for your lashes. Each stroke builds the illusion. You try to hold still as your face is transformed by layers of pigment and glaze, becoming both you and an idea of you. This art of beautification isn't just vanity, it's political. Portraits send messages about alliances, wealth, and social standing. To sit for a portrait is to declare your place in the world, and because portraits were often gifts or tools of diplomacy, you know your image will be scrutinized far beyond this room. Here's a historical fact. By the 14th century, portrait painting was becoming increasingly popular among European nobility. These images were not only keepsakes but public statements. Artists like Jan van Eyck pioneered techniques that allowed for detailed realism, yet many still preferred to idealize their subjects to suit societal ideals. In many cases, portraits were as much about aspiration as about reality. The process itself was arduous. Sessions could last hours or days, during which you had to remain immobile, the artist pausing only to mix pigments or discuss pose. Painters sometimes use mirrors to study their subjects' expressions, but the final work often smoothed over signs of imperfection, blemishes, scars, even emotional depth. And here's the fringe fact. Some patrons would commission multiple portraits, each subtly different, to be displayed in different locations or given to different relatives. Some women even kept beauty consultants who advised the artist on how to flatter them best, controlling everything from hairstyle to the angle of the jaw. A perfect portrait was carefully curated, an early form of branding. Despite the idealization, portraits reveal a lot about medieval beauty standards. High foreheads are exaggerated, hairlines pushed back beyond what nature allowed. Eyes are large but demure, lips small and often painted a gentle pink. The emphasis is always on control. Control of expression, control of appearance, control of how one is remembered. You wonder what your portrait will say about you centuries from now. Will it show your quiet strength or your silent suffering? Will future eyes see the woman beneath the layers of paint, or just the icon she tried so hard to become? The candlelight flickers, casting dancing shadows on the half-finished canvas. Your lips are pursed, your eyes lowered, your face serene. It's beautiful. It's not you. But maybe you think that's exactly the point. You don't like to admit it, but the men have started to take over your beauty routine. Not literally. No barbers tugging at your hair or apothecaries mixing potions in your private chambers, but their influence is creeping in, reshaping how you think about yourself and your looks. The once secretive knowledge of beauty, passed down through women's hands and whispered in convents, is becoming the province of male experts. Apothecaries, physicians, barbers, and even alchemists who claim the right to dictate what your skin should look like, how your hair should fall, and what poisons you should trust. You hear the stories, how apothecaries craft elaborate powders with ingredients they barely understand but sell at exorbitant prices. How barbers double as cosmetic surgeons, wielding knives and razors with a strange authority over female faces. Men with learned books in Latin declare which plants soothe the skin, which tinctures remove blemishes, and which salves will make your cheeks flush without fever. You realise that these men have taken control of the very alchemy you once practiced in secret. This shift is subtle, but profound. Where once women shaped their own beauty rituals, now it's overseen by men who understand the body through the lens of medicine and science, or at least what passed for science at the time. Male physicians diagnosed female maladies and prescribed beauty treatments that were as much about controlling women's bodies as enhancing their looks. They claimed to heal hysteria, melancholy and infertility, often with potions that doubled as cosmetics. And of course, barbers played a crucial role. In addition to cutting hair, they performed bloodletting, tooth extraction and minor surgeries. Women sought their help for facial treatments, sometimes painful procedures to remove moles or reshape noses. It was a strange inversion of power, men wielding scalpels in the name of feminine beauty. Here's your historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, barbers and apothecaries formed guilds that regulated cosmetic practices. These guilds set standards for ingredients and procedures, controlling who could produce and sell beauty products. In cities like Paris and Florence, it became illegal for women to make and sell certain cosmetics without guild approval. This effectively handed control over beauty to men. The shift wasn't always welcomed. Some women resisted, holding on to traditional knowledge of herbs and rituals, passing them down quietly. But many were coerced or persuaded by the promise of safer treatments and the prestige that came with medically approved beauty. You've heard of women travelling miles to consult male apothecaries, even though the remedies sometimes included dangerous substances like mercury or arsenic. A fringe fact? Some male apothecaries also dabbled in the occult. They sold love potions and charm salves alongside face creams, blending superstition with commerce. These mixtures often came with warnings: use only at night, avoid certain saints' days, beware jealous rivals. Beauty and magic were still intertwined, but the magic was now mediated by men in frock coats. The debate among scholars today centres on whether this male takeover was a loss or a gain for women. Did it professionalise beauty, making treatment safer and more effective, or did it rob women of agency, turning their bodies into sites of medical control and patriarchal oversight? The answer is complicated. It depends on class, location, and individual circumstance. For you, it means learning new rituals, adopting new potions, and sometimes feeling uneasy as a man diagnoses your skin or prescribes your rouge. But it also means access to innovations, a new shade of lip colour, a rarer ingredient, a treatment no one else in your village has tried. You're caught in a strange dance. Beauty, once a private act of self-care and defiance, has become a public performance mediated by men who wield power in ways you can only partly understand. You close your eyes and touch your face, feeling the weight of centuries of changing hands and hidden knowledge. Your reflection is no longer just yours. It belongs to an evolving world of experts, clients, and expectations. Tonight, as you prepare your lotions and powders, you wonder, who really controls beauty? The mirror shows a different woman now, one older, lines tracing softly along her temples, and eyes that have witnessed more than they let on. But age is not a concession here, it's a challenge. In a world obsessed with youth and purity, the older woman's beauty becomes a battleground. You know it well. The pressure to erase years, to mask wrinkles, to fake the softness of youth never truly fades. Instead, it sharpens, twisting into desperate rituals that promise to turn back time. You've heard of women who bathed in milk to soften skin, who rubbed rosewater and crushed pearls over their faces in hopes of fooling time itself. But more than that, you've seen widows in black, who still tint their lips with beetroot and paint their cheeks with subtle rouge, fighting invisibility with every stroke. Their beauty is a quiet rebellion, a way to say, I am still here, I am still desirable, I still matter. The widow's glow, they call it, not a term of kindness, but one that carries power. Because in the Middle Ages, an aging woman who refuses to fade is both admired and feared. She's a living contradiction, both the wisdom of years and the temptation of youth. She holds on to beauty not just for vanity, but as a shield against loneliness, irrelevance, even poverty. You know women who risked health and reputation to maintain their looks, applying mercury creams to smooth wrinkles, despite knowing the danger. Some mixed arsenic into their powders, desperate for that flawless pallor. Others wore heavy perfumes to mask the scent of aging bodies, refusing to be written off as past their prime. Here's a historical fact. In 16th century England, Queen Elizabeth I famously used white lead makeup mixed with vinegar and egg whites to create her iconic pale face, an act of vanity and power. But behind the throne, many older women, widows especially, adopted similar toxic cosmetics in secret, desperate to preserve their status and influence. A fringe fact. Some widows even carried small hidden containers of rouge and lip stains in their sleeves, reapplying in secret throughout the day to maintain their youthful illusion. It was considered scandalous, yet quietly accepted, because beauty was survival. Modern scholars debate the widow's glow with interest. Was it a form of empowerment, a refusal to disappear, or was it a trap, forcing women to cling to impossible standards to remain visible in a youth-obsessed culture? Maybe both. You see in yourself the echoes of that struggle, a fight not just for beauty but for dignity and voice. Tonight you sit by the fire mixing your potions and powders, aware of the years in your bones but refusing to let them define you. You don't seek to be a saint or a muse, you seek only to be seen, to be remembered, to glow just a little longer. You know the ideal is impossible, the unattainable standard hammered into your skin, your bones, your soul. It's a cruel myth, a story told in whispers and sermons and stained glass. The perfect woman is pale as the moon, slender as a reed, modest as a saint, but alluring enough to captivate kings. The paradox gnaws at you. You can never be too plain or too beautiful. Too much effort is pride, too little is sloth. You're caught in a no-win game, a trap set centuries ago, and it shapes every breath you take. This dangerous ideal has deeper roots than you realized. Some say it began as a way to control women, keep them small, compliant, and focused on appearance rather than power. Others argue it was born from religious fears, an attempt to purify the female body from its supposed inherent sinfulness. Either way, it's a poison disguised as beauty. The pursuit of it destroys bodies and spirits alike. You think about the countless women before you who starved, poisoned, and bound themselves to fit this mould. They plucked hairlines until their scalps bled, smeared lead paste until their faces cracked, fasted until their bones poked through skin. They wore veils to hide and to hint, layered garments that suffocated, and heavy perfumes that masked decay. All for what? A fleeting approval, a fragile safety. The misogyny wrapped around this ideal is thick. It tells you that your worth depends on your face, your form, your modesty. It erases your voice, your ambition, your intellect. It reduces you to appearance, to temptation, to sin. And when you fail, you are punished, not just socially, but sometimes physically and spiritually. Here's the historical fact. Medieval laws often regulated women's appearance. Sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what colours, fabrics, and even hairstyles. These rules were about more than fashion. They enforced class and gender hierarchies, ensuring women's bodies were policed and public morality maintained. In some cities, women caught wearing improper makeup or revealing dress-faced fines, public humiliation, or worse. Now for the fringe fact. There are accounts of women who deliberately disfigured themselves to avoid this impossible standard. Self-mutilation as resistance, scratching faces, plucking out eyelashes, even burning skin to escape the trap of beauty. These acts were dangerous and often led to accusations of madness or witchcraft, but they were cries of desperation, protest against a system that demanded destruction. Scholars debate whether medieval beauty ideals were imposed top-down by patriarchy or embraced by women as a form of agency. Some argue women weaponized beauty, using it to navigate a hostile world. Others see it as internalized oppression, a cycle of pain and control. You suspect it's both, complicated, contradictory, and deeply human. You stare into your mirror tonight, tired but determined. The face looking back is layered with centuries of expectation and rebellion. You trace the faint cracks in your lid powder, the high forehead you shaped with pain, the faint blush you forced onto your cheeks. It's not perfect, it's real, and maybe that's enough. You look at your reflection one last time before the night swallows the candle's glow. Every line, every flaw, every carefully painted stroke tells a story of survival, sacrifice, and the quiet wars waged behind silk veils and behind closed doors. You realize that the beauty rituals of the Middle Ages were more than just habits or customs. They were acts of resilience, expressions of identity in a world determined to define you by your appearance and nothing more. You were never just a woman trying to look beautiful. You were a complex being navigating impossible expectations with whatever tools you had. The layers of powder, the pinching of cheeks, the tugging of hairlines, they were your armour and your burden, your fight to be seen and respected, to claim some agency in a society that too often denied you both. Some women starved themselves to holiness, others poisoned their skin for purity, and many simply tried to survive another day with dignity intact. You see in their stories echoes of your own struggles, the yearning to be noticed but not judged, to shine without burning. Medieval beauty rituals destroyed bodies but shaped histories. They crafted icons of purity and sin, saints and sinners, Madonnas and Magdalens. They helped define gender, class and power. They were prayers whispered through ointments and prayers swallowed with every breath. And in their complexity lies a truth we still wrestle with today. That beauty is never just skin deep. It is political, social, spiritual. Here's your historical fact to close the chapter. Many medieval women who endured these extreme beauty practices were venerated or canonized precisely because of their suffering. Saints like Catherine of Siena and Mary Magdalene were celebrated not only for their piety, but for their endurance of pain and denial. Pain that often involved self-starvation, fasting, or mortification of the flesh, as signs of divine favour. And your fringe fact. In some folklore, the spirits of women who died from beauty rituals were said to haunt mirrors, seeking to warn the living of vanity's cost. Tales of mirror ghosts appear in various cultures, warning that obsession with appearance could trap souls forever. Whether superstition or metaphor, the stories remind us of the human cost beneath the cosmetics and corsets. You stand, extinguishing the candle with a soft breath, the room slipping into shadow. The mirror's surface fades into darkness, but the reflection remains in your mind. The brave, complicated, flawed woman who dared to face impossible standards and still claim her worth. Beauty in the Middle Ages was a battlefield. You survived it, and that is your triumph.